She was 57 years old and she had just been told, by a man she had loved for 31 years, that he needed more space to grow. Not more space in the house. Not more space to pursue a hobby or find himself or whatever it was. Men said at 60 when they started wearing younger shoes and leaving their phones face down on the counter. More space. As if 31 years of her life had been a room he had been slowly suffocating in, and she had been the walls. His name was Douglas, and he had said it at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning in April, while Callie's coffee was still brewing, and the light was coming in through the window over the sink, the way she had always loved it. That thin, clean spring light that made everything look like it was being held up to be examined. He had folded his hands on the table the way he did in meetings, as she had always noticed that, and he had used the word journey 3 times in 4 sentences, and the word authentic, and the word deserve, and by the time he was done, she understood that she had spent 31 years being married to a man who had been quietly assembling an exit strategy the way other men assembled furniture, a piece at a time. Without ever asking if she noticed. She had noticed. She had just believed, as women of a certain kind believe, that if she kept the house and cooked the meals and asked nothing of him she could not afford to lose, he would stay. He did not stay. He was gone by the following Thursday, and what he left behind was a joint account with $412 in it. A mortgage on a house in Knoxville, Tennessee that was in both their names, but had always felt only like hers. Scent, and a silence so complete, she could hear the refrigerator breathing from the upstairs hallway. Callie Marsh had spent 31 years being the kind of woman who held things together. She had raised 2 sons, put them both through state school, worked 22 years as an office manager for a civil engineering firm downtown. A job she did not love but was very good at, because she was very good at keeping the pieces of other people's work from coming loose. She made the coffee at 6 a.m., and she stayed until the last drawing was filed, and she knew where every permit was and every deadline, and she never once asked for credit for any of it, because it had not occurred to her until very recently that credit was a thing you were supposed to ask for. The firm let her go in November, 8 months after Douglas left. Restructuring, they said, which meant they had found a 26-year-old with a software subscription who could do 3 jobs at once and did not need health insurance or a pension or 31 years of institutional knowledge about where the bodies were buried. Her last day, she cleaned out her desk into a single cardboard box, shook 4 hands and carried the box to her car in the parking garage, and she sat in the car for 20 minutes before she started it, because she could not think of a single place she needed to go. The house sold in January. It sold for more than she expected and less than she needed, and after the mortgage was settled and the lawyers were paid, there was enough left to keep her going for a while, but not forever. 57 years old with a cardboard box of desk items and a number in a savings account that went in only one direction. She moved into her cousin Bernice's spare room in Gallatin, which was 30 miles north of Nashville, and about as far from her own life as she had ever been while still technically standing in it. Bernice was kind about it, which made it harder. Kindness, when you have been used to being the one who dispenses it, sits on you like a coat, 1 size too large. It was in Bernice's spare room on a Wednesday afternoon in February that the letter arrived. It came from a law office in a town called Calder, Kentucky, up in the hill country near the Virginia border, a town Callie had not thought about in 30 years. The letter said that her aunt, Thelma Garrison, had passed away at 81 years of age, and that according to her will, she had left her estate to her niece, Caroline Eleanor Marsh. Callie read the letter twice. Then she sat down on the edge of Bernice's spare bed and read it a 3rd time. Thelma Garrison had been her father's older sister, a woman Callie had met exactly 4 times in her life. The last time was at her father's funeral, when Callie was 26, and Thelma had stood at the graveside in a black wool coat that was too hot for August, and had not cried once and had said to Callie afterward, in a voice like a chair scraping a floor, "Your father and I were not close, but you have his eyes, and his eyes were always honest." Then she had gotten back in her car and driven the 4 hours back to Calder, and Callie had not heard from her again until this letter, which arrived 31 years later to tell her that Thelma was gone and had left her something. The something was a boarding house. The letter from the law office described it in 2 sentences: a structure of 9 rooms and a common kitchen located at 14 Harlan Road, Calder, Kentucky, and value, per current county records, $800. $800. Not 800,000. 800. She called the number on the letterhead. The lawyer was a man named Silas Puckett, and he sounded like he was approximately 100 years old, and conducted all his business at the pace of a man who understood that nothing in Calder had ever been improved by hurrying. He confirmed what the letter said. The boarding house was hers if she wanted it. The county had assessed it last spring, after a section of the porch roof came down. Most of the structure was sound, he said, but she should understand that sound was a relative term in a building that had been largely unoccupied for several years. He said largely unoccupied, which meant not entirely. Callie asked him who was still in it. There was a pause. One tenant, Kit said. A young woman, been there about 2 years. Your aunt let her stay on. I don't know the particulars. Callie thanked him and hung up and sat for a long time. $800 and a stranger in one of the rooms. She thought about Thelma Garrison in that black wool coat, not crying at her father's graveside. She thought about a woman who had driven 4 hours to a funeral for a brother she had not been close to, and had come anyway and stood in the August heat in a coat too heavy for the season. Because some duties you do not weigh for comfort, you simply do. She thought about the 4 times she had met this woman in her life, and how little she had asked in any of those 4 meetings, and how she had asked nothing now. Only handed Callie a thing and stepped aside. The next morning she put 3 days' worth of clothes in a bag and told Bernice she would be back by the weekend, and drove her 11-year-old Civic northeast, out of Gallatin and up into Kentucky, into the kind of country that gets quieter and hillier the farther you go, where the road starts to follow the creek instead of cutting across it, where the towns get smaller and farther between, and the ridge lines come down close on either side, and hold the hollow below them, like hands cupped around something small and breakable. Calder was at the end of one of those hollows. Maybe 300 people on a good day. A main street with a hardware store and a diner and a post office and a church that looked like it had been built in 1890 and had not been surprised by anything since. The hills rose steeply on all sides, covered in bare February hardwoods, and the light in the hollow was the cold, thin light of a place that does not see much sun until late morning. It smelled of wood smoke and creek water, and something underneath that was just the mineral cold of the hills themselves. She found the law office above the hardware store, up a narrow flight of stairs. Silas Puckett was indeed approximately 100 years old, a small dry man with white hair and a desk stacked with folders in a system she could not identify. He handed her a ring of keys and a manila envelope, and spent 20 minutes explaining the deed and the property taxes in a voice that moved at exactly 1 speed regardless of the content. Then he said, "The young woman in room 4 is named Bet. She paid your aunt in work, not cash. Kept the place up as best she could. You'll want to talk to her before you decide anything." Callie took the keys and drove up Harlan Road. The boarding house sat at the end of a short gravel lane, a 2-story white frame building with a wide front porch and green shutters that had gone gray at the edges. One section of the porch roof had come down at the far end and been covered over with a blue tarp that had been there long enough to have faded almost white. The yard was winter dead but neat, the hedges trimmed back, the steps swept clean. Someone had been taking care of the things they could take care of. She sat in the car for a while looking at it. A crow called once from somewhere up the hillside, then was silent. A length of smoke rose from the chimney on the left side of the building, thin and steady. Someone had a fire going. The front door opened before she reached the porch steps. The young woman who came out was perhaps 24 or 25, slight, with dark hair cut short and practical. She wore a flannel shirt and work pants with the knees gone pale, and she held the door open with one hand and looked at Callie with the particular measuring look of a person who has learned to assess quickly whether someone means them harm or not. "You're the niece," she said. "I am," Callie said. "You're Bet Sayers." She held out her hand and Callie shook it, a firm, dry grip, a working person's hand. "Come in. I've got coffee on." Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and beeswax and faintly of old paper. The front hallway ran straight back to a kitchen, with a staircase on the left and a common room on the right with a braided rug, and a stone fireplace where a low fire was burning. The floors were wide pine boards gone amber with age, and they were clean. The windowsills were clean. The woodwork was dusted. In the common room, a bookshelf ran the length of one wall, filled unevenly with paperbacks and board games missing their boxes, and a collection of small ceramic birds that someone had arranged by color. Bet poured 2 cups of coffee at the kitchen table, and set one in front of Callie, and sat down across from her and did not say anything, which Callie found she appreciated. "Tell me about the place," Callie said. Bet told her 7 of the 9 rooms had not been rented in going on 3 years. Since your aunt's health declined, and she stopped being able to manage the stairs, and then stopped being able to manage at all. The 2 rooms that had been used recently were Bet's and one other, a man named Roy, who had stayed 8 months doing some kind of road work on the county highway, and had left in October. Thelma had lived in the small room off the kitchen on the ground floor since her hip went bad, and that room was still as she had left it. I've been keeping the boiler running and the pipes from freezing, Bet said. Fixed the gutter on the north side in November. The porch section needs a new beam and a new ridge board, but the rest of the porch is solid. The roof on the main structure is sound. The wiring is old, but it hasn't given me trouble. She said all of this in the steady informational tone of someone giving a property report, not defending herself, not asking for anything. Why did you stay? Callie asked. Bet was quiet for a moment. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Your aunt let me come here when I had nowhere else to go, she said. I was 22. I'd left a situation that wasn't safe, and I had $140 and a bag and no plan. I walked in off the road in the rain and she sat me down at this table and made me a plate of eggs, and she did not ask me a single question I didn't want to answer. She paused. She gave me room 4 and she said I could stay as long as I needed to and pay her back in work when I was on my feet. I've been here 2 years and I'm still not sure I've paid her back for what she did, so I stayed. If this story is already finding you in a place you needed it, take just 1 second and hit subscribe, so we can keep bringing you stories like Callie's. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from today? We read every single one. Now let's get back to Callie, and to what she found in Thelma's room. Thelma Garrison's room off the kitchen was the size of a large closet. A narrow iron bed, a ladder-back chair, a small writing desk under a window that looked out on the side yard, a wood stove in the corner, and on the desk, a tin box and a cloth-covered journal, and a letter taped to the journal cover with a piece of masking tape on which was written, in a hand so compressed and precise it was almost like type, for Caroline. When you come, not if. When. Callie sat down in the ladder-back chair and looked at her name on the tape for a long time. Then she picked up the journal first. It was not a diary, it was a ledger. The first page in that same compressed hand read, Harlan House, Record of Persons, and below it, a single line that Callie read 3 times before she understood it. No one who needs a room here goes without one. She turned the page. The entries went back 29 years. A name or a description when there was no name, a date, a line or two about who the person was and what they had needed. March 1996, a man late 40s, just out of the hospital at Pikeville, said he had no people. Stayed 6 weeks in room 2, helped fix the water heater, and in the margin added later in slightly shakier ink, wrote to me from Ohio in 2004, found his daughter. His name was Glenn. September 1999. A girl, maybe 19, would not say her last name. Bruise on her jaw, she explained badly, stayed in room 7 3 weeks. Left for her sisters in Lexington. Sent a card at Christmas for 4 years after, January 2003. A family, mother and 3 children, car broken down on 4/21 in the snow. Father working in Virginia, couldn't reach him. Stayed 4 nights. Children ate everything in the kitchen and apologized for it. I told them that was what the kitchen was for. Page after page, year after year. Thelma Garrison, who had lived alone in a boarding house in the hills of eastern Kentucky, and was known to precisely no one outside Calder, had spent 29 years keeping a spare room and a pot of soup and a refusal to ask questions that didn't need to be asked. And she had written every single person down. Not for praise, not for record. For the same reason a shepherd counts a flock in the dark, because if you love something, you keep count of it. Callie turned to the last entries. The handwriting had grown unsteady, the letters larger and less controlled, but she had kept writing. August, 2 years ago. A young woman, wet through, walked up from the road in the rain. Name is Bet. She is frightened of something she will not name yet. Room 4. No charge until she finds her feet. She has good hands. She will be all right. And below it, separately, in what must have been the last hand Thelma had used before she could no longer manage the stairs. She is still here. She fixed the gutter herself. She will be all right. Callie closed the journal. She sat in the small cold room off the kitchen for a long time, listening to the fire in the wood stove tick and settle. Outside the window, a red-tailed hawk crossed the slice of gray February sky she could see over the ridge. The hills held the hollow below them, and the hollow held the house, and the house held something she did not yet have words for, the residue of 29 years of quiet decision, The warmth that soaks into the walls of a place that has been kept warm on purpose, not for comfort but for use. She had cleaned offices her whole life. She had kept other people's rooms in order and tracked other people's deadlines and made sure nothing fell through the cracks. And she had never once thought to ask what it was all for. What was the thing being held together? She understood, sitting in Thelma's room, that the question had an answer, and that her aunt had found it 29 years ago. Then she opened the tin box. Before I tell you what was in that box, and why the man in the silver pickup was about to be very surprised, take just a second to hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Stories about quiet women who kept the lights on deserve to be heard. Now let's get back to Callie. Inside the box were two things. A bundle of letters and cards held together with a rubber band, gone brittle with age, and a sealed envelope with Callie's name written on it, in the same compressed hand as the tape on the journal. She opened the envelope last. Caroline, you are probably wondering why I left this place to you, and not to someone who knew me better. The answer is that I don't think the two things are related. Knowing me better would only have meant knowing the surface. What I want to leave you is not the surface. Your father and I were not close, but I watched him from a distance, the way you watch a river you can't cross. He was a good man who didn't know how to say so. I think you may have married a man with the same problem, and I think you have spent your life being the one who kept the water running and the lights on, and never asked anyone to notice. I know that because your father was the same, and I understood the kind of woman that makes. I am leaving you Harlan House, not because I think you should run a boarding house. I am leaving it to you because I think you need to understand that some things in this world cannot be bought or sold or walked away from, because they are not property. They are promises. I made a promise to this house 29 years ago, and the house kept it with me, and now I am asking you, not telling, asking, if you will keep it too. If you don't want to, let Silas handle it. He'll find a way. But if you come up here and you sit in my chair and you read the book and you understand what it is, then you will already know your answer before you finish reading this. The young woman in room 4 is named Bet. She is a good person who had bad luck, which is the only kind of person this house has ever been for. You will like her. Your father's eyes were always honest. I hope yours are too. Your aunt. Thethel McCallie set the letter on the desk and looked out the window at the ridge. The bare hardwood stood in the cold and the hawk was gone, and somewhere below the ridge a creek ran over stones she couldn't see, and she could not hear it. But she knew it was there because this was that kind of country, where the water is always near even when you can't find it. She had $412 in an account in Gallatin. She had a spare room at Bernice's, and a cardboard box of desk things, and a pension that was going to run out before she was ready for it to. She had 2 sons she loved, and who loved her in the distracted way of grown children who have their own problems, and mean to call more often. And she had a boarding house in the hills of eastern Kentucky that was worth $800 on the county books, and 29 years of kept promises in a cloth-covered journal. She did not feel like crying. She felt instead like a person who has been driving in fog for a very long time, and has just seen a light. She came out of Thelma's room and found Bet in the kitchen making soup, moving around the stove with the unself-conscious ease of someone who has cooked in this kitchen long enough to know where everything is without looking. She did not turn around when Callie came in, but she said, "There's more coffee if you want it." Callie sat at the kitchen table. How long would it take to get the porch roof fixed? Bet turned then, spatula in hand, and looked at her with a careful look that was trying not to be hopeful. "If I get the lumber, couple of weekends. I know which beam and what size. What else does the house need?" Bet set the spatula down. She pulled out the chair across from Callie and sat in it and thought for a moment with the seriousness of someone who does not like to give imprecise information. "The wiring needs to be inspected. The boiler is old, but it's reliable if you don't push it. Room 6 has a window sash that swelled and it won't close right in the damp. 3 of the bathroom fixtures upstairs need recalking." She paused. "Nothing that can't be handled. The bones are good." "The bones are good," Callie repeated. Thelma always said that. A pause. She said the bones were what mattered. Everything else you can fix. The silver pickup came on the 4th day. Callie had driven back to Gallatin, packed what she needed, told Bernice she wasn't sure when she'd be back, and returned to Calder on a Friday morning. She had spent 2 days cleaning rooms alongside Bet. Real cleaning. The kind that required a bucket and a stiff brush and the willingness to get on your knees. and she had started to understand the scale of the thing she was considering. It was large and it was cold, and it was going to cost more than she had. And it was also the first place in a year that felt like it was asking something specific of her. Something she actually knew how to give. The silver pickup pulled into the gravel lane on Tuesday afternoon with the confidence of a vehicle that goes where it intends to go. The man who got out was somewhere around 50, in a barn coat that was too clean for anyone who actually worked in barns, and he shook Callie's hand in the gravel yard with the energy of a man who has shaken a great many hands and considers it a skill. His name was Denton, he said. He represented a regional development group that was acquiring properties in the hill counties for tourism and recreation development. He was sorry about her aunt. He had heard the Harlan house was in difficult condition, and he wanted to be straightforward with her about the situation, which was that the structure needed significant investment that a woman in her position might find challenging, and his group was prepared to offer her $35,000 for the property, cash, quick close, no complications. Callie looked at him. "What would you build here?" "Boutique lodging," he said. "The county is seeing real interest in Appalachian heritage tourism. This location, this character, it's very on trend right now." "On trend," she said. He smiled, adjusted his stance. "The market moves fast. My group is prepared to be generous. But these decisions have windows. A woman on her own, property this size, the maintenance costs alone." "What do you know about the maintenance costs?" Callie asked. Something shifted in his face briefly. "We do our due diligence, ma'am." "I'm sure you do." She kept her voice level. "Let me ask you something. The property taxes on this building have been paid every single year for 29 years, current through this month, which you would know if you'd looked at the county records. The structure has no liens and no outstanding code violations, which Silas Puckett can confirm. And the well and the septic were both inspected and certified 2 years ago." She paused. "So what is it you think you're taking advantage of exactly?" Denton's smile was a thing that took some effort to maintain. "I'm not trying to take advantage of anyone. I'm making a fair market offer on a distressed." "You should know," Callie said, "that I've spent 22 years managing a civil engineering office. I know what a survey looks like and what a title report looks like and what a man looks like when he's counted on someone not to read either one." She looked at him for a moment. "I'm not selling, but thank you for coming." She turned and went back up the porch steps. Bet was standing just inside the screen door, and she stepped back to let Callie through, and neither of them said anything until they heard the silver pickup back out of the lane and drive away. Then Bet said, "He's been by once before, about 6 months ago." Thelma told him the same thing, except with considerably more profanity. Callie laughed, which surprised her. She had not laughed in a while, and it felt strange and also right, like a window opening in a room that's been closed too long. She stayed. It was not one decision. It was 10 small ones, the way all real decisions are. She called her Silas Puckett and had him transfer the D, whose name was Marcus, and told him what she was doing, and he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Mom, are you sure?" And she said yes in a way that made him understand she was. She opened a checking account in Calder and arranged to have her pension deposited there, and she sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and made a list of what the house needed and what it would cost, and in what order, and she crossed items off the list as they were done. She and Bet fixed the porch roof in 2 weekends, which was 2 weekends longer than Bet had estimated because the second beam turned out to need replacing too, but they fixed it right, and it was solid when it was done. Callie learned to run the boiler. She recalked the bathroom fixtures. She hired an electrician from Pikeville to come out and inspect the wiring, and he found 3 things that needed to be brought up to code, and she had them done and paid for it with the last of what the Knoxville house had left her, and she did not regret it. She put a card in the window of the Calder hardware store that said, "Harlan House. Rooms available. Reasonable terms. No questions asked that don't need asking," which was how Thelma had always worded it, Bet said, when she'd put the card up years ago. The first new tenant came 3 weeks later, a man named Walter, 62, who had been living out of his truck since his wife passed, and his landlord raised the rent on him in the same month. He sat at the kitchen table the way people sit when they have been in a truck for 2 months and not quite realized what kind of shape they were in. And Callie made him a plate of eggs and did not ask him anything he did not want to answer, and she gave him room 3, and he stayed. Then a young couple, 20 and 22, who had come up from Harlan County looking for work, and had not found enough of it yet. They stayed in room 7 for 6 weeks, and then found an apartment and left a card on the kitchen table that said, "Thank you," in handwriting. So careful, it looked like they had practiced it. Then a woman about Callie's age who had driven up from Tennessee with 2 suitcases, and a look Callie recognized because she had had it herself not that long ago, the look of someone who does not yet know where they are going, but has become very certain about where they cannot stay. Callie gave her room 2 and a cup of coffee and showed her the journal. Not the whole journal. A few pages. The ones she thought the woman needed to see. The entries that said went on safe, went on well, sent a card at Christmas, found his daughter, is a nurse now in Lexington. The ones that said, people who come through this door go on from here. This is not where you stop. This is where you rest. The woman read the pages for a long time and then she looked up and said, "Who wrote this?" "An old woman who didn't make much noise," Callie said, "but she kept count." If this story has stayed with you, tell us in the comments, who is the person in your life who kept the door open when you needed it most? And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Every story on this channel exists because of the people who take that 1 second. We are grateful for every one of you. Now let us get back to Callie and to the thing she did on a Tuesday morning in early spring that she had not planned and could not have explained to anyone who asked. She had found in the second drawer of Thelma's writing desk a key on a plain brass ring with a number burned into a wooden tag. The number was 2, not room 2, which was already accounted for and used. The key did not match any of the room locks upstairs. She had noticed it in January and set it aside and forgotten about it, and then found it again. And one Tuesday morning she went through every lock in the house with it, methodically, and it opened nothing until she came to the door at the back of the cellar, behind the boiler, which she had assumed was a storage closet, and had not opened because the boiler was not near it and she had not needed to. The key opened it. Inside was not a closet. It was a room perhaps 10 by 12 feet, with a low ceiling and a small casement window at ground level that let in a stripe of winter light, and in it, a workbench, a wood stove, a narrow cot, and on the shelf above the bench a coffee can full of pencils and small tools and folded pieces of paper and string. And on the workbench, under a canvas that had been laid over it neatly, a wooden box, roughly the size of a small suitcase, dovetailed at the corners with a care that was almost ceremonial. Callie lifted the canvas. The box was locked, but beside it, tied to the handle with a piece of butcher's twine, was a key. She opened it. Inside was a stack of letters, bundled in groups by year with rubber bands, going back to the late 1980s. And beneath them, a smaller envelope with her name on it, in Thelma's hand, and below her name 4 words. "Read the letters first." She sat down on the cot and read them. They were not to Thelma. They were from people, dozens of people, spread over 30 years, who had found this address and written back to it. Some were handwritten on motel stationery or the backs of envelopes. Some were typed or printed from computers in the later years. Some were only a few lines. Some were pages. She read for a long time. There was one from a man named Glenn, the one from the journal, who had been in room 2 in 1996 and had found his daughter and written from Ohio. He had written 4 more times after that, each one a little longer. The last one dated 6 years ago, describing a grandchild named after his daughter, and a garden he had put in along the fence, and a life that sounded, she thought, like a life. He had written, "I have tried to explain to my daughter how I came to find her. I always end up telling her about the woman in the hills who did not ask me any questions I wasn't ready for. My daughter says I should go back and thank her. I have been meaning to, I will." There was one from the woman who had left for her sisters in Lexington, who was now a reading specialist at an elementary school in Frankfurt, and had a dog named Harold, and had been teaching adults to read on Tuesday evenings for 11 years, which she had started doing, she wrote, because she kept thinking about how your aunt told her that everyone deserves a room and a second chance, and she figured that applied to reading too. There was one from the family in the snowstorm, the mother writing on behalf of all of them, on a piece of paper, with a child's drawing of a house in the corner. She wrote that the youngest, who had eaten everything in the kitchen and apologized for it, was in high school now and wanted to be an engineer. She wrote, "She talks about the woman in the hills who said the kitchen was for eating. My daughter thinks that is the most sensible thing anyone has ever said." And then the last letter in the box, the one on the bottom of the stack, in an envelope that had been placed face down. When Callie turned it over, she saw it was addressed to Thelma in a child's hand, with the letters uneven and the stamp crooked, and a drawing in the corner that might have been a bird, or might have been a house, or might have been both. Inside was a piece of lined notebook paper. The top in the same child's hand. Dear Thelma, I am the girl who was scared when I was 7. I am not scared anymore. I am 10. My mom said I should write, I love you. Callie set the letters down on the workbench and looked at the window above it, the stripe of cold spring light coming in through the ground-level glass, and she understood what this room had been, a counting room. A room for keeping track of the people who had gone on from here and had found it in themselves to say so. A room for holding the evidence that the thing Thelma was doing had mattered, in case there were ever days when she needed to remember that it did. There were probably days. Callie understood there would be days. She opened the small envelope with her name on it, the one Thelma had put at the bottom of the box. Caroline. If you have read the letters and you are sitting in the room behind the boiler, then you know everything you need to know. This room is yours now. You may use it for the same purpose or any other, but I want you to know that on the days when it felt like nothing I was doing mattered, which are the days that always come, I came in here and I read them, and they held me up. A boarding house is a very ordinary thing. A room and a bed and a plate of eggs, and someone who does not ask the questions that don't need asking. There is nothing grand about it, but I have come to believe that the most ordinary things, done with enough steadiness and enough years, become extraordinary by a process that nobody schedules and nobody announces. The evidence is in the box. Keep the room open. That is all I ever did. Thelma Callie refolded the letter and held it for a moment. Then she laid it back in the box with the others, gently, and closed the lid, and sat with her hands flat on the wood. She thought about Douglas, who had needed more space to grow. She thought about the civil engineering firm that had found a 26-year-old with a software subscription. She thought about the Knoxville house with the cottonwood in the yard, and the 31 years of quiet work that had vanished into a cardboard box, and a savings account that went in only one direction. She had spent 31 years keeping the water running and the lights on in other people's buildings, and she had never once understood that the building was the whole point, that the building, the tended, kept, held together building, was not the means to something. It was the thing itself. On a Saturday in April, Callie Marsh opened every window in Harlan House that would open, and the cold hill air came through and moved the curtains in every room. She brewed a pot of coffee and put it on the counter, because a house that has held people for 30 years smells like it needs a pot of coffee always warm, and because Bet was in the yard splitting wood and would want some when she came in. She took Thelma's journal from the desk and brought it to the kitchen table, and she turned to the first empty page after the last entry in her aunt's compressed hand. She picked up a pen. She wrote, April. A woman, late 50s, came from Tennessee with 2 suitcases, and then she paused, because the woman in room 2 had asked her not to use her name. She honored that the way Thelma had always honored it. She wrote, she is finding her feet, she will be all right. And below it, continuing the line of Thelma's entries, she wrote her own name, Callie Marsh, room open. She closed the journal and set it on the counter beside the coffee. Through the kitchen window she could see Bet in the yard below the ridge. The axe coming down in clean arcs, through the cold morning air, the wood splitting and falling, the stack beside the porch growing. The hills above the hollow were beginning to go that first thin green that the Appalachian hardwoods put out in early April, a green so new and tentative you could almost miss it if you weren't watching for it. But once you saw it, you understood that the winter was over, not metaphorically, not as a thing to be declared, but as a fact, quiet and complete, the way all true endings are, not dramatic, not sudden, but already done by the time you notice, the season having turned while you were busy doing the next necessary thing. The coffee finished, and she poured 2 cups and carried one out to the porch and set it on the rail where Bet would find it when she came up from the yard, and she stood in the thin April sun and looked at the ridge and the creek she could not see but could hear now, running fast with snowmelt below the tree line, and she thought about what her aunt had spent 29 years learning and had tried to say in a letter in a tin box in a room behind a boiler. The most ordinary things, done with enough steadiness and enough years, become extraordinary by a process nobody schedules and nobody announces. Callie Marsh was 57 years old. She had been left with $412 and a boarding house worth $800 on the county books by a woman who had kept a light on in the hills for 29 years and had trusted her with it. It was more than anyone had given her in a long time. It was, she was beginning to understand, exactly enough. If this story has stayed with you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet to Grand Stories, there is a button right there. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to the work we do here. Every story we tell is for the people who listen all the way to the end. Thank you for being one of them. We will see you on the next one.